Today we're looking at the top 15 best JRPGs currently available for the PlayStation 5. It's only fitting as the console turns 5 years old. But this list is probably not what you're expecting, and you might be shocked at which games I leave off. What have been your favorite PS5 JRPGs? Drop a comment and let me know. Now let's get this started right with a bit of a curveball with the Diofield Chronicle. Now, probably the first eyebrow raiser on this list is the Diofield Chronicle, but I can't help it. I just loved this game. It's a real-time strategy RPG where you have a party of 4 characters and there's pretty simple objectives like capture a base or defeat a certain amount of enemies. But I don't know, for me, I was just really hooked on it. There's just a good variety of gameplay where, you're doing a battle and then you come back to your base and talk with different characters, and then you maybe do some side quests to kind of level some stuff up. Everything was just quick and snappy and you're just off to the next activity. But I totally understand that it's not for everyone, but I ended up getting the platinum trophy. Now, my absolute favorite character in the game is Waltaquin, and she kind of starts off as this damsel in distress, but as the game goes on, she turns a corner and kind of becomes like the Joker and just invokes all this chaos, and it was so fun and made a rather mundane story into something pretty intriguing. Not to mention she got her own free story DLC that admittedly isn't great, but hey, I'm not gonna balk at free DLC. Now, this is during a time where Square Enix was just kind of dumping all their games at once, and it didn't really sell that well, but the ending is absolutely wild, so I'm hoping for a sequel, probably in vain because I doubt we'll ever get one. One of my favorite new JRPG franchises of the 2020s has been Scarlet Nexus. It has this awesome dual protagonist story where you can either play as Yuito or Kasane that have more or less the same adventure through the story, but they have different perspectives on the story and you can kind of get different characters in your party. So it's worth playing the game twice. It has this really cool futuristic cyberpunk vibe, and there's these creatures called the Others that come down to Earth and you're trying to stop them. I will say that the game is relatively low because of the story. It was kind of weird, and by the end of the game, I just had no idea what was going on. Now, the game is not structured like a traditional JRPG. It's more mission-based, where you pick a mission, you go to a battlefield, you fight some monsters, and then you move on to the next one. But what's cool is you have a party of 3 characters, and you have special powers where your main character has psychokinesis. You can kind of pick up items and throw them, anything from just little objects on the ground to giant trains. And as the game goes on, you can also borrow powers from your party members to do some really awesome attacks. And honestly, the combat just feels incredible. Not to mention it has this really cool, slick art style. And if you can, definitely play it on the newer consoles where it can run at 60 frames per second because it looks incredible there. And I have to give a tip of my cap to the sound design in this game because I think it's a totally overshadowed part of an awesome game. I always love a good underdog story, and man, did I just cheer for Visions of Mana, and it bums me out that it didn't sell particularly well, but I absolutely loved this game. It expands on what Trials of Mana did in so many beautiful ways. There's a bigger world, there's so much to discover and explore, especially with chests all over the place and collecting the grizzly syrup so you can spend it at the vendor and get better items. Not to mention a totally expanded combat system with tons of different classes, and you have these different elements that you can mix and match with different characters. It was so much fun to see which characters had what classes and what worked best. Not to mention they all had different costumes, and I love that in RPGs, so it was really fun to just try out different classes with characters just to see what they looked like. At the beginning it did feel a little slow, but eventually I found some classes that felt really good. Not to mention this game is absolutely gorgeous. It's saturated with so many bright colors. Exploring the world, going to the different towns is just so much fun, and it has this really wonderful, whimsical soundtrack. Now, it probably would have been higher, but for me, the story didn't land how I wanted. There was some really weird stuff going on in the story, and there was a pretty big twist that I thought they would reverse, but they never did. Not to mention, it's a really big shame that the studio closed. That said, the director did join Square Enix, so maybe we'll get more Mana in the future, but who knows. Man, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin I think is overly hated and criminally underrated. Now, it's pegged as a sort of reimagining of the original Final Fantasy, but that's really stretching it. In a lot of ways, this is more of like a Neo or Souls-like game where you pick a level, you go through, there's some different little enemies, and then there's a big boss fight at the end. It's challenging but fair. It's not going to be like this super try-hard thing. I'm not the greatest at games. I've beaten Bloodborne and Elden Ring, but I think this game was definitely easier than those. But really, it relies more on parrying dodging and blocking. But to me, why it's on this list is the combat. It feels so good. I loved trying out all the different classes that you would think might not even work in a Final Fantasy game with this speed of action, but you play like the white mage, you don't just sit there and heal, you can actually attack, and it's super fun. I actually ended up playing the DLC and a lot of the post-game content, and man, this game is just so much fun. I know it's not for everyone, but I absolutely had a blast with it. My advice is just skip the story unless you really want to partake in the cringe and just enjoy the gameplay because it's excellent. Square Enix definitely has something really special with their HD 2D art style, and I absolutely fell in love with it in this particular game, Star Ocean: The Second Story R. That art style absolutely took my breath away. Every time I visited a new town, I wanted to go in every little house, explore every corner because it was so beautiful. Not to mention a really compelling story with super fun characters, very classic throwback JRPG. I mean, it came out during the PlayStation 1 era, so of course it's going to be there, and that's my bread and butter. But they added so many quality of life design choices, like asking if you want to equip new gear, fast travel, tons of new skills, and this sort of really cool call-in mechanic where you have throwback characters from other games in the series. Now, what held this game back from being really high on the list, maybe even top 10, were a couple really bad dungeons, particularly one near the end of the game where you're stepping on these different portals with different colors and you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go. I'm not even kidding, I almost quit the game at that point, but I'm glad I didn't because I saw it through to the end and it was totally worth it. If you like JRPGs, whether you like retro ones or modern ones, I think this fits a nice balance and you absolutely need to play it. Now we're getting serious. Moving into the top 10, we have one of the biggest surprises of the decade so far, and that is Chained Echoes. On the surface, it looks like every other 16-bit throwback JRPG, but it is so much more. It has this really unique combat system where it has this overdrive bar where anytime you attack, it moves up. Anytime you use an item or block, it kind of goes down, and you want to stay in this green zone because you can do more damage and take less damage, but if you go over, then you'll take more damage and you won't do as much damage. It keeps battles engaging instead of just mashing the most powerful attack over and over again. And it really invites you to explore with huge environments, big towns, looting houses, talking to people, and finding secrets. Definitely one of my favorite things to do in games. Not to mention an incredible presentation. The art style, well, yes, it is a 16-bit style game. I think it's even more detailed, like the characters have more pixels to them, the animation is really smooth, and that music is absolutely incredible. I think the reason why it's so high is it just felt fresh. I mean, over the years, I've played a lot of JRPGs, and sometimes they all kind of meld together in my head over the course of a year or a decade. So it takes something really high quality to stand out, and this does both. For those that only play a handful of JRPGs a year, might not find it as refreshing. I get it, but for me, it did. And it's really impressive that most of this game was only made by one guy. And also there was some DLC recently released, so this game just keeps on giving. If you have not played Chained Echoes yet, man, go correct that immediately because it's incredible. I had to include Trails in the Sky First Chapter. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had another game and I actually took it out because Trails in the Sky was that good that it had to be on this list, and I knew I'd hear about it in the comments if I didn't have it in there. Now, this is arguably one of, if not the best JRPG remake I've ever played. The game has been lovingly remade in these gorgeous visuals. Now it's in fully 3D, runs at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5 when I played, and apparently up to 120 frames per second if you have a monitor that can support that. And another amazing addition to this remake is it's fully voiced in English. The voice acting breathes new life into these characters and makes them feel alive like never before. All the performances are amazing, and I absolutely fell in love with this cast. Of course, with the main characters Joshua and Estelle, but also the entire supporting cast, with Olivier being a particular favorite of mine. And I can't talk about the amazing additions to this game without talking about the brand new combat system that they pulled from Daybreak. No longer is the game simple turn-based combat across grids, but it's a mix of simple action combat that you can then transition to dynamic turn-based combat. And this is all about positioning and area of effect damage, and it's super fun. Maybe my favorite combat system in any game, period. Plus, the game added a high speed mode that you can toggle on and off. So if you want to run between towns or just speed up combat when you're fighting trash enemies, you can really just blaze through this game. Now, I'll admit, I've never been the biggest Trails fan, but this game made me a believer. It was amazing from beginning to end, and I'll be waiting yet again for Sky's second chapter, but hopefully we won't need to wait 4+ years this time. Tales of Arise has garnered a weird amount of hate since its release, but I still think it's an absolutely incredible game. First of all, this game is just stupidly beautiful. The environments are gorgeous and super detailed. I loved exploring every inch of it. And the character designs are fantastic. I love looking at their different outfits, and they all look so unique. And speaking of which, this is probably my favorite cast of characters in any game in the Tales series. They all had so much depth and reasons for going on this adventure. Personally, I loved watching Alfred and Shion's relationship grow. Shion went from this total ice princess thanks to her thorns to being vulnerable by the end of the game. Now, I will admit that the story kind of fell apart near the end, but overall, I really enjoyed the story. But what really grabbed me was the gameplay. Of course, it has that awesome action combat system. It's super dynamic where you can call characters in, you can switch characters out, and each character felt so different, and it almost felt like a totally different game each time you play a different character. And outside of combat, everything ties together in really cool ways. You're incentivized to explore because you find these owls throughout the world, and depending on how many owls you find, you then unlock outfits for your characters, and that's a common theme I'm sure you're picking up. So it was really fun to get all these different outfits for my characters and see what they all looked like. And in fact, I loved playing this game so much that I ended up getting the Platinum Trophy. Now, of course, Tales of Arise certainly isn't without its flaws, but this seems to be the game that put the series back on the map, winning Best RPG at the Game Awards back in 2021. And here's hoping they continue to refine the series further and make the next game even better. Now, in years past, I probably would have had Final Fantasy VII Remake higher, but with time and letting the nostalgia bomb settle, its flaws become a little more prevalent, but don't get me wrong, it's still an incredible game. For context, the original Final Fantasy VII is one of my favorite games of all time, and to see it so lovingly recreated filled me with so much joy. I loved simply walking around Midgard to soak in the familiar locales like the Wall Market or Seventh Heaven, and I loved getting to know my favorite video game characters all over again. In particular, I enjoyed Barrett and Aerith like I never have before. Like in the original game, I didn't really care about them, but in here, their characters are incredible. Square Enix breathed new life into this world in ways I never thought possible. Here in this game, there were more than polygonal caricatures. They felt real. They have passions, fears, and motivations that come through in more believable ways than in almost any game I've ever played. And actually playing Final Fantasy VII Remake was a blast as well. Trash mobs are fun because you have to actually think about how you want to stagger them. You don't just mindlessly pick attacks from a menu. And the bosses were on a whole nother level. They were so epic, and the music absolutely matches it in incredible ways. Now, I will admit that there were a lot of sequences that felt padded and were stretched to their breaking point, and this game is really taking what was originally a 3 to 4 hour section and stretching it to 30 to 40 hours, so I get that they had to do that a little bit. But regardless, this is still an amazing first step in this trilogy. Now, speaking of remakes, we have to talk about Persona 3 Reload. Now, I have a confession to make. I've never beat the original Persona 3. I got really far. In fact, I got to the final boss, but I just could not beat them because in the original Persona 3, you can't control your party, not to mention a weird fatigue mechanic. But the remake fixes all of this and so much more. Obviously, the update to modern visuals and that signature Persona flair is amazing. Being able to explore this world in fully 3D and not just being a dot on a screen like in the PSP version was incredible. They did their best to make Tartarus tolerable, but it's still admittedly pretty bland and boring. I will say I felt like it was much easier, like I didn't need to grind as much. Obviously without the fatigue mechanic, I can kind of blast through dungeons a lot faster. And I noticed that by the end of the game, I had a lot of extra days that I was just skipping through or just kind of doing random social links because I had nothing else to do. That said though, man, that Persona game loop still holds up and is addictive as ever. Not to mention the remix tracks sound amazing and the new VO cast was pretty much perfect. Outside of Akihiko, he sounded a little bit off, but other than that, everyone sounded exactly like they should. Persona is my favorite gaming series, and I'm happy to see this amazing remake just like this to a game I never finished, and I cannot wait to see what they do with Persona 4 Revival because the original Persona 4 is my favorite game of all time, so I have pretty high expectations. We had to wait a really long time for Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, and it's hard to live up to that much hype, but in my opinion, of all the games we had to wait that long for, I feel like Grand Blue Fantasy absolutely delivered. But it's not exactly what I expected, or I think what a lot of people expected. It's not a traditional JRPG where you go town hopping, it's more quest-based and set-piece heavy. Think Monster Hunter meets Uncharted. But I love both of those franchises, so I was all in on this game. And each story quest is so wildly different. In one, you have just killing monsters, you're trying to beat them, get through the level. In the next, you have this giant titan shooting lasers everywhere and you're trying to climb it. And another, you're storming an airship trying to take it down so it doesn't take you down. Not to mention tons of other unique ones that I don't want to spoil. And here's the thing I like about the main story, it's all killer, no filler. It's pretty short, maybe around 12 hours, but it is jam-packed. But what's cool is you can keep playing for dozens and dozens of hours after the credits roll, because more story quests unlock, there's different harder versions of bosses, and you can just keep going for as long as you want to. Not to mention there are so many characters. There's like 20 plus very different characters, not to mention all the ones they added post-launch. But my personal favorite was Fairy. She has these whips and she summons these sort of ghost animals that can fight on her behalf, and her combat loop was just really fun. Not to mention it has an absolutely incredible art style. It ran at 60 frames per second on PS5, silky smooth, and it has a pretty amazing soundtrack. What's nice is this went on to sell over 2 million copies, and I do hope it sold well enough for Cygames' expectations to consider a sequel, because man, I would be there day one. Now, it might be really surprising for you guys to see Ys 9 this high on the list, but allow me to explain. First off, I'll admit that the story isn't super strong. It can be slow at times, especially the prison sections when you're trying to escape, although there is a pretty crazy twist that I won't spoil that makes the story worth experiencing. But for me, there are fewer games on this list that I had more fun playing than Ys 9. As always for the series, the action is silky smooth and so satisfying with that 3-party combat system where you kind of swap with different weaknesses that the enemies have, so you have to kind of keep swapping to make sure you have the right one. And honestly, all the characters were super fun, but my personal favorite was Vidal. She kind of moves on these roller skates and she has very acrobatic move sets, and I don't know, I just really enjoyed playing as her. Now, the unique game mechanic here in Ys 9 are the gifts. Basically, these are different ways you can explore environments, like gliding off a high ledge, running up walls, zipping to spots, and so much more. This made something as simple as navigating the world absolutely thrilling. These made for the most enjoyable experience collecting collectibles. Otherwise, those are pretty boring, but it was really fun to run up walls and find secret walls to try to find absolutely everything. And I ended up getting the platinum trophy because I wanted to do everything this game had to offer. And man, we cannot forget about that rockin' soundtrack by JDK Band. When you're fighting enemies and they're absolutely shredding, it's just pure gaming bliss. And the other thing that's really nice about it is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. At around 25 hours, I feel like that's the perfect length for a game like this. I hate when games waste my time, so here, all killer, no filler, absolutely loved Ys 9. One of my favorite new franchises is Octopath Traveler, and Octopath Traveler 2 is definitely the better of the two games. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much the same game, but also improved in a lot of dramatic ways. Of course, it has that incredible HD 2D art style, that dynamic turn-based combat system, but in Octopath Traveler 2, it adds just a few extra little flares to put it over the top. There's now a day-night cycle, and the game looks absolutely gorgeous at night. It released outside of just the Nintendo Switch, so it runs at 60 frames per second, and the combat system also has this special ability for each characters that give each class a dynamic twist. But I think the biggest improvement, and one of the reasons why this game is so high on the list, is the writing. Way more of the characters in this game have interesting stories that I wanted to see to the very end. And they also added opportunities for the characters to actually interact. Personally, my favorites in this game were Throne, Agnia, and Hikari. I couldn't wait to see how all their different stories ended, but for me, I think Agnia was my absolute favorite. I love those touching, heartwarming stories, and hers of trying to live up to her mom as a performer was just so cute and sweet, and I loved that one. Now, a lot of people complain that the story still doesn't really connect in a better way overall, and I totally understand that complaint, but for me, I just didn't care. In Octopath Traveler 2, I could just pick the stories I want, finish the ones that I wanted, and the ones that I didn't enjoy, I can just leave and it's totally fine. And I'm glad to see that the series is continuing this year with Octopath Traveler 0, and man, I cannot wait to see what goes on with that story and where the series goes next. I remember seeing the reveal trailer for Expedition 33 and thinking it looked incredible, but I never expected it would have been this good. It's a completely fresh take on the genre with dynamic turn-based combat, an emotionally gripping story, an incredible cast of complex characters, and an absolutely stunning soundtrack. What begins as essentially a suicide mission to try and defeat the enigmatic paintress responsible for killing generations of people transforms into something you'll never see coming. But what makes it so good are the characters. There's There's so many incredible performances, they're so well written, and they just felt human and real. And a lot of the characters obviously are dealing with their own mortality and are willing to do whatever it takes to stay alive. But what's great about Expedition 33 is it doesn't just sit and stew in the dire atmosphere. It knows how to keep things light and crack jokes and be silly. So I feel like it does a perfect balance of all these different emotions. But this is a game, and what keeps it going and what makes it never feel boring is that incredible combat system. It's timing based, where you have to do these timed button presses depending on which attack you're doing, not only on offense, but on defense. You can either parry and do damage back to the enemy or just dodge. And each character has a unique gimmick, and so it was really fun to experiment with them, build them exactly how I wanted, and kind of break the game in some fun ways. Not to mention that hauntingly beautiful soundtrack, whether it be the main theme, walking around environments, or in the turn-based combat. Overall, Expedition 33 was an absolutely incredible experience. I fully expected to sweep the Game Awards this year, but hey, stranger things have happened. Now, you probably could have guessed this, but honestly, no other game really came close to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It is simply one of the greatest games I've ever played. I lost count of how many times I said to myself while playing it, how is this game real? Everything from the scope, the production value, and the quality of the game are unlike anything I'd seen before. And all of this in a game that reimagines one of my all-time favorites, made for a truly special experience. Every time I got to a new location, I wanted to explore every corner of it to see what had changed and what had stayed the same. And honestly, no section failed to impress me except maybe that lame Shinra Mansion section with Cait Sith. Each zone was brimming with fun activities and unique minigames. Some people thought I was a little bit overkill, but honestly, we've been missing fun side minigames in Final Fantasy, so I welcomed it. Not to mention Queen's Blood, which I completely lost myself in and got all the way to the end of that quest line. And the music, oh my god, that music. Absolutely incredible stuff. One of the best gaming soundtracks of all time. And this game made me feel such a range of emotions. You know, games are fun, but I haven't had a game's story truly move me, and I don't know how long like Rebirths did. It put me through every emotion from sadness, confusion, excitement, thrill. I mean, it just did absolutely everything. And when a game can move you like that, that's when you know it's special. Simply put, it's my favorite PS5 JRPG, and I don't see anything taking its crown outside of the third game in the remake trilogy. Now, these are the best PS5 JRPGs, but to see the best Nintendo Switch JRPGs, watch this video next.